Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all around me, on all sides. I'm so pleased that all of you are here to take time to commemorate the USS Oklahoma and her crew. My name is Daniel Brown. On behalf of the National Park Service, I welcome you to the 9th commemorative ceremony at the USS Oklahoma Memorial. It is an honor to be your Master of Ceremonies this afternoon. I would like to acknowledge our speakers for today's ceremony, along with our distinguished guests, flag and general officers, and members of the Senior Executive Service. And very importantly, our returning USS Oklahoma survivors present with us today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for returning here, for the long trip that you've made. It means so much to us. And at this time, we will hear opening remarks from the Superintendent of World War II Valor in the Pacific National Monument, Jacqueline Ashwell, and Mr. J. Blake Wade, representing Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin.
Aloha. Welcome to all of you here today, but most importantly, welcome to our returning USS Oklahoma and Pearl Harbor survivors. 6 years ago, World War II Valor in the Pacific National Monument was expanded from the single site of the USS Arizona Memorial to include additional monuments, such as the USS Oklahoma Memorial behind us. But greater lengths of time have changed this place too. This site has transformed from a battleground to a military base to a national monument. No doubt some of you here today have seen some of these changes over the years with your own eyes. Yet the National Park Service's commitment here does not change. We will continue to recognize the legacy of the USS Oklahoma and her crew, 429 who were killed as a result of the attacks on December 7, 1941. Standing near these 429 pillars reminds us of a time when two worlds collided, and a generation of wounded warriors who responded when our country came under a surprise attack in this very place. A generation linked to us by 75 short years. The USS Oklahoma's honored veterans are recognized and esteemed here at the National Monument. To you veterans of World War II, to the Pearl Harbor survivors, and especially to the USS Oklahoma survivors and their guests, we are so glad you're here. Thank you.
Aloha. I'm Blake Wade, and I'm representing the governor of the great state of Oklahoma, Mary Fallin, and I couldn't be more honored to be here with such a tremendous crowd. May I say to all of you VIPs, it's an honor. I see so much brass, but I see so many other people that are so wonderful to be here. So let's give each other a round of applause for being here. I had the rare opportunity of being with Oklahoma when it turned 100 years old, and that was in 2007. And at that time, we came up with a master plan of projects that had never been done over the 100 years of our young state. One was the finishing of our Capitol. They built it all the way up and never put a dome on it, and it was built for that. Secondly was the dedication of the USS Oklahoma over here in Pearl Harbor. Let me say to you, in 2007, because of a lot of generous people that helped on this project, we were able to dedicate this then. And from that day, may I say, it was one small tent right over here. And we could probably put all 50 of us all together, but it was a great day. And look at it today. I mean, this is how big this is going and how strong it is. Last night at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, I was walking by a group of people that were sitting there watching this film, USS Oklahoma, The Final Days by PBS. I'm telling you, if you have not seen this wonderful, emotional piece of work done by PBS, please do see it, because it made so much clarity to me on how important the USS Oklahoma and its people and its survivors worked to this project. You know, we did the dome, and now we're done the USS Oklahoma. And my third project is I'm wearing this Indian belt because I'm doing the American Indian Cultural Center Museum in Oklahoma City, dedicated to our 39 Indian tribes. I have the most beautiful opportunity to help the American Indians in Oklahoma. And for that, and I'm going to say it here since I'm over here in Hawaii and no one will hear me in the United States, I've sent all my Indians all the way up to Standing Rock up in the Dakotas to take care of that business. So I hope they make it back. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the governor and all of us in Oklahoma, we thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here today and to be able to realize that this will be here forevermore. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And now Captain David Bynum, United States Navy Chaplain, will now offer the invocation.
Let us pray. Holy God, we come before your presence, seeking your special blessing on the heroes of December 7th, 1941. We remember those who died that day, those who survived but have since gone on to their reward, and these special warriors of USS Oklahoma who have returned after 75 years to honor their shipmates and to pay tribute to their sacrifice. We remember the courage of men like Chaplain Aloysius Schmidt, who assisted others in escaping, refusing to seek his own opportunity for rescue so that others might be saved. We recollect the commitment of civilian sailors, shipyard workers like Julio de Castro and Joe Boga, who risked their lives to save men trapped within the capsized ship. Displaying a toughness and tenacity that inspire us still, they utterly disregarded their own safety to rescue others, refusing to leave a shipmate behind. We pray that such a day as December 7th, 1941, never again befalls our nation. But knowing how compelling war can be, give us, the warriors of today, the same spirit of resolve manifested by these heroes, so that we too, empowered by your divine presence, may meet every challenge with boldness and courage. Amen.
Thank you. At this time, will you please rise for the presentation of colors and the playing of our national anthem. Color Guard, parade the colors. Hand salute. Ready, two. Color guard, post, colors. Thank you. You may be seated. And at this time, I would like to invite our guest speaker, Brigadier General Mark Spindler, to give remarks on behalf of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. General Spindler has commanded soldiers and civilians from platoon through brigade level in both the United States and abroad. Operationally, General Spindler has had multiple deployments into the Balkans and Iraq. He now serves as the Deputy Director of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, where he is responsible for the global analysis and investigation, search and recovery, and laboratory operations to identify unaccounted for Americans from past conflicts. And as many of you know, recent activities at the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency have only tightened its relationship to the USS Oklahoma families. The story, for those of you who don't know, the story is an interesting one, reminding us that their lives will never be forgotten. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brigadier General Mark Spindler.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Admiral Swift, Undersecretary Davidson, Mr. Wade, Federal Representatives, Superintendent Ashwell, flag officers, general officers, senior executives, distinguished guests, and of course, our Pearl Harbor survivors, and certainly those of the USS Oklahoma. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you just for a few moments at this hallowed place about this extraordinary day, and how the story of the Oklahoma and the fate of its crew on the morning of December 7th, 1941, continues to be a source of inspiration for generation after generation of Americans. Americans inspired by their courage, a courage that has canonized our national identity, carved into our hearts the sacred value that we will not forget the sacrifice of our service members, that we will remember the men of the Oklahoma. We will remember this day, and we will honor them. When I first came to Hawaii last fall as the new deputy director, the first thing my wife and I did was to visit the memorials here at Pearl Harbor. And as we did, we could not help but be moved by the sheer carnage and the violence of that morning. The end of an innocence, the extraordinary valor displayed by the men and women caught in this horrible moment, and the reality that we were literally standing in the epicenter of historical significance that changed the world like no other time in recorded history. In visiting the memorials, one of the highlights for me is viewing the film, How Shall We Remember Them?, which is shown to the patrons prior to being ferried out to the Arizona. It gives the visitor a good understanding of why this day occurred. Over the past year, I've seen the film many times in the course of my work. And I recall about 5 months ago, I was seeing the film for probably the 10th time. And I'm leaning back and I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention. And as I watched the film close and fade into darkness, it suddenly struck me that this is not the end of the story. That the story of Pearl Harbor and the Oklahoma and all who perished here that day goes on with unmeasurable relevancy and importance for our future. Our nation today remains fully committed to honoring our fallen and their families, and to the full accounting of the missing, and to the best of our efforts and ability, we will restore their identity or determine a conclusion of their fate. So towards that end, in 2015, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, supported by the Armed Services and Combatant Commands, reinvigorated the Global Recovery Mission and commissioned the DPAA to lead the effort in providing the fullest possible accounting for our missing to their families and to the nation. 429 men of the USS Oklahoma were killed in the attack of December 7th. And of the 429 dead, 388 were unable to be identified. And regrettably, were compelled to be buried as unknowns in the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. But through persistent work from our historians, archivists, and scientists, and with the advent of DNA, we were, in 2015, granted permission by the Office of the Secretary of Defense to disinter these remains and begin the painstaking work of identifying them and restoring their names. And ladies and gentlemen, I am very proud to say that in just 1 year, the dedicated men and women of DPAA have identified 72 of the 388 missing or unknowns from the Oklahoma. And we are more than optimistic that we will be able to identify nearly all of them within 5 years. The Oklahoma project, as it is better known to us, has allowed us to refine and streamline many of our scientific protocols, becoming invaluable in speeding up our identification time and dramatically increasing the number of identifications made in a given year. And now DPAA is recognized and heralded as a leading laboratory and facility in the world in forensic anthropological identification. In front of you, within the grove of marble pillars with black ribbon, are photographs of those warriors who for over 7 decades laid under a stone that said unknown, but have now been identified by DPAA and their next of kin notified. They are now accounted for within the national record, returned to the care of their families, and probably most importantly, are no longer known only to God. Most poignantly, what the Oklahoma Project has demonstrated is that there are no longer unknowns. That advancements in science, coupled with an energized commitment from our government to uphold the sacred creed that we will leave no one behind, has resulted in a celebrated time in which we can say with great confidence that there are no longer unknowns laying on these fields of honor. Just not yet. If we can get to the remains and we have the family samples, we'll identify them. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say one more time, no more unknowns. We now find ourselves in a wonderful time and an exciting time to finally be able to restore the names of our unknown heroes lying in graves or still on battlefields throughout the world, in great part by what we have learned and continue to learn in the examination of the men of the Oklahoma. What a wonderful and fitting legacy for these men. So today is for sure a day of reflection about the great price that has been paid, and as we all know, continues to be paid to free mankind from tyranny and oppression. But it also is a day to celebrate the spirit of man, as we the living bear witness to the goodness and greatness that can be restored and rise from the very depths of darkness. In 1945, General George S. Patton Jr. at the end of the World War, in a speech in Boston, Massachusetts, said, "It is wrong and foolish to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived." In that spirit, let us leave this place of honor today, remembering and celebrating the men of the Oklahoma who bravely endured the slaughter of December 7th. Thankful, renewed, and inspired in knowing that their sacrifice was not in vain. For their courage and great resolve rallied the free people of the world to fight and win the most devastating war in human history. And finally, to the warriors of the USS Oklahoma, your sacrifice has inspired our warriors today to carry on the difficult task of defending our freedoms throughout the world. And gentlemen, as you take your leave from this place, take pride in knowing our national values continue to be strengthened. And know in your hearts that our sacred promise that we will leave no one behind is faithfully being fulfilled. May God bless the men of the USS Oklahoma and their families. God bless our armed services, and may God continue to bless our great republic.
Good afternoon. My name is Rear Admiral Retired Greg Slovanik. I am co-chair for the USS Oklahoma Memorial, and my partner is Commander Tucker McHugh. And 10 years ago, we had a vision to build this beautiful facility, and it finally came true. So, as Blake Wade said, to have so many here today to celebrate this event is truly an honor. Admiral Swift, Undersecretary Davidson, Secretary Parker, Superintendent Ashwell, USS Oklahoma survivors, distinguished guests, I'm extremely honored to be part of the program today. Let me give you a snapshot of the journey which brought us here today. The vision to build this memorial was something that was near and dear to many of us, especially two survivors by the name of Paul Goodyear and Ed Vezey. They made up the veterans on our executive committee as it was formed in 2000. Along with this committee was Ray Ackerman, Admiral Retired, civic leaders, political officials, and an architect by the name of Don Beck. I will tell you that Ed Vezey was the conscience of our committee. He helped us maintain true north. He helped us maintain why we were a committee and the importance of his shipmates, the sailors, the survivors of the Oklahoma. The journey was a rocky one because the National Park Service and the Navy had never worked with a nonprofit group to build a memorial of this nature. First requirement was to acquire land. We did not have any land to build this memorial. So thanks to the Defense Authorization Act of 2004 that our Oklahoma delegation put together, we were able to acquire land. And the land that we're on today was identified by Commander McHugh, and this is the site was chosen to be the memorial, the location for the memorial. Now, the memorial is probably different from many that you've seen. Let me give you a little history on how this memorial came together. Our architect, Don Beck, attended a sunrise service with Commander McHugh in 2005. And this morning, as we had the USS Halsey parade by with their crew manning the rails at attention and giving salutes back to the survivors, Don Beck at that time said, "That is the design for the memorial." So behind me is 429 white standards with each crew member's name, their rating, rank, standing tall, standing proud, manning the USS Oklahoma one last time. Two of the standards that you'll notice have a gold star above their name. Ensign Frank Flaherty, Seaman James Ward. Those were the two Medal of Honor recipients that day. Frank Flaherty was a roommate for Ed Vezey. And Ed would tell the story many times that when general quarters was sounded, they got up out of their bunk, pulled their pants on. Frank went out, went to the right. Ed went out, went to the left, to their battle stations, to their general quarters stations. That was the last time Ed Vezey saw his shipmate, Frank Flaherty. As Blake Wade said, he headed up the Centennial Commission, and that was critical to us being able to stay on our building schedule and to be able to dedicate this on our statehood of 2007. This tribute is a lasting memorial to the sailors, to the survivors, to the families, and it should remind all of us that history shall not be rewritten, because on December 7th, 1941, the Oklahoma, with 429 sailors, perished, and with the second highest loss of life. So thank you for remembering, thank you for being here today, and those of you who attended the ceremony this morning, I'm going to have to steal a line. I hope Admiral Swift isn't going to take it. But I've got to steal a line from Admiral Harris, who said, "The survivors of Pearl Harbor, the greatest generation, would never take a knee when the national anthem was played or sung." The survivors, the Oklahoma survivors, will be truly missed, but you will always be remembered. So thank you very much. I now have the honor to introduce Admiral Swift. Admiral Swift is the 62nd Commander, U.S. Pacific Fleet. It's ironic that the Pacific Fleet, that billet that the Admiral holds, was created in 1907, which was the year of our statehood. He's had a distinguished career. A couple of his key assignments was Commander 7th Fleet. He was Director Navy Staff before coming here. He's a naval aviator. Admiral, we're extremely honored to have you here today as our guest speaker. Thank you very much.
Well, it's great to be with you all here this afternoon. Quite an honor for me to join you on such a historic day and such a historic celebration, being the 75th. And it seems appropriate to first frame how special this 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor and its surrounding bases is. We often talk about once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. All of us gathered here together on this 75th anniversary mark, in what many ways is a last-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The reality is that while our yearly remembrance of the attack is always an important event, we do tend to think of 25-year milestones as most significant. The next milestone will be the 100th anniversary in 2041. And I am sure it will be a huge event. But there will be no firsthand accounts, no opportunities for those that have faced the crucible of war on December 7th, 1941, to assure those of us in uniform that we too have what it takes residing deep within us, even if we have not ourselves been tested. Those service members gathered at the 100th will not have the privilege to stand in the presence of Pearl Harbor survivors, struck by their humility, awed by the strength and depth of bonds forged between those that stepped into and survived that crucible that day, and those that stepped into but did not step out, framed so often by the anguished question of the survivors, why wasn't I taken as well? So in that context, while this and all anniversaries are important, The 75th commemoration of the attack on Pearl Harbor is particularly special, as the survivors and their families are here with us today. We are grateful for their many sacrifices then and now, but most grateful for the example that they have set for all of us. They are living records of the wounds our nation endured on that day in December, and of the resilience that allowed us to fight back, turn the tide of war, and ultimately achieve peace and reconciliation with former adversaries. That path began here in Pearl Harbor in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it led our Pacific nation to grow from a Pacific power to the Pacific power. Sailors who serve today on Pearl Harbor and throughout the Pacific embody that proud heritage. It's hard for many to appreciate what the morning of December 7th was like for Pearl Harbor survivors 75 years ago. Hollywood comes close, but really, it's the voices of the survivors and their stories that best capture the surprise, the fear, the anger, and the determination that so many experienced that morning. Uncertainty of mind, followed by certainty of action. Of the ships damaged or sunk that morning, the loss of life on the USS Oklahoma was second only to the loss of life on the USS Arizona. Here today, as was mentioned, we honor the 429 sailors who gave their lives that morning, as well as the survivors whose stories continue to inspire both current and future generations. The number of Oklahoma survivors who are with us each year is dwindling, and we're very fortunate that sailors like Ray Richmond, with his family traveling from San Diego to be part of this year's commemoration. Peter Nichols, a former Oklahoma sailor, is also with us, and while he transferred to Kaneohe Airfield a few months before the attack, he also fought that morning. And Roy Carpenter, another Oklahoma sailor, has joined us as well. In his preliminary damage report, Oklahoma's commanding officer estimated there was 1 minute and 10 seconds between the explosions of the first and fifth torpedo that struck Oklahoma that morning. Put another way, in just over 2 minutes passed from the first torpedo hit and the order to abandon ship. In less than 15 minutes after the attack began, Oklahoma was on her side. When the first Japanese torpedo hit the ship, young Raymond Richmond was taking his morning shower. After the torpedo struck, and as the subsequent torpedoes struck, finding their mark, he found himself struggling through the darkness and explosions to get topside. Ray jumped overboard as Oklahoma was rolling over on her side, breaking his back in the fall. He struggled to swim across to the USS Maryland, several times diving below the surface that was covered with burning oil. At the waterline next to USS Maryland, he couldn't get up the rope ladder on his own, and in their panic, sailors stepped over him as they climbed the ladder themselves. He was finally helped by a shipmate from Oklahoma, and once on board, despite broken back, Ray manned an anti-aircraft battery, fought alongside the crew for over 2 hours, as did so many of his Oklahoma shipmates. In the aftermath of the attack, he collapsed from exhaustion and was so covered in dirt and oil that those responsible for collecting bodies thought Raymond was dead, until he woke up in the back of the vehicle they had placed him in. This is just one story from a battle that was fought by service members that woke that morning as everyday sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, and retired that night, heroes all. Peter Nichols was another such hero. As his former shipmates fought for their lives in Pearl Harbor, he was busy attacking the onslaught of Japanese fighters with a bolt-action Springfield rifle, the only weapon he could lay his hands on, as they attacked his new duty station of Kaneohe Field. Oklahoma's ordeal didn't end when the Japanese ceased the attack. Many sailors were trapped in compartments below decks as the ship rolled over. And perhaps one of the most compelling stories is the story of Ray Carter. Ray Carter was a carpenter's mate and damage controlman, and his assignment was to save the ship by sealing its watertight compartments. And in doing that, he sealed 8 sailors within a compartment as he exercised his duty, not knowing their fate brought about by his actions. Many sailors were trapped in compartments well below decks as the ship rolled over. They banged on bulkheads and pipes to get the attention of potential rescuers. In a testament to what civilian sailors brought to the fight, 32 trapped Oklahoma sailors, including the 8 sealed within the compartment by Roy Carter, were rescued in the next 2 days by Navy shipyard workers using chisels and air hammers to free them. So in hindsight, it turns out that the lives of those 8 sailors were in the hands of Roy, and they lived because of his actions on that morning. Sailors like Raymond, Peter, and Roy, and those shipyard workers displayed the Navy's core attributes of toughness, initiative, integrity, and accountability that morning. They made sure that what the adversary intended as the first and last battle of a short war was only the opening act. They rejected putting themselves first, despite an innate organic drive to first survive. Their refusal to accept defeat still resonates throughout the Pacific Fleet today and remains a great source and inspiration of strength and fortitude, and forms the core of what is now often referred to as the American fighting spirit. It is in this context of these realities that I've been so honored to share a few thoughts with you this afternoon. As the Pacific Fleet Commander, who resides as the 35th resident of Nimitz House, I'm reminded every morning when I awaken of the incredible lesson we were provided here in this harbor on December 7th in 1941. A lesson that was as relevant when President Roosevelt stepped to the congressional podium the next day on December 8th as it is today, and as it will be for all our tomorrows as Americans. The words may have been President Roosevelt's that day of December 8th, but the actions they reflected were already history, written here in this harbor by the likes of Ray Richmond, Peter Nichols, and Roy Carter, and the rest of those called to action that fateful morning. So gathered as we are here, we represent a grateful Pacific nation, a proud Pacific Fleet, steeped in the heritage born from the history made here 75 years ago. Thank you all. May God bless each of you, and may God bless this great nation we are all so honored to serve. Thank you.
Admiral, General, thank you so much. You know, as we again mark the loss of so many young lives from the USS Oklahoma, we, as you mentioned, we also recognize the bravery and the sacrifice of the survivors of that ship on that day and continuing into the future. To the Oklahoma survivors, for years you have stood as a unified force, calling us to remember, as Admiral Slavonic said, reminding us with this beautiful memorial. And in so doing, you honor your fellow shipmates more than we ever can. And will you please stand to be recognized one more time? Stand, please stand as able. Thank you. Now you and some in the audience may recognize that one of our beloved survivors is not with us today, who otherwise would be, Mr. Ed Vezey. Ed was seen by many as the spokesperson for the USS Oklahoma survivors, and as Admiral Slavonic mentioned, helped immensely in the construction of this memorial. Although he passed away this year, we remember him now through the words of his granddaughter, Rebecca, who would like to come now to share a short, fond tribute of her grandfather. And she will be escorted today by Major Frank Huffman, an instructor of Colorado State University, ROTC. Please come. Thank you.
First and foremost, I would like to say thank you so much to all of our servicemen and women, and especially the Oklahoma survivors and all the Pearl Harbor survivors we have here today. Thank you so much for your service and your sacrifice. To have known Edward Earl Vezey was to have known a hero. He had many roles in my life, but the main one was Grandpa. I'm so grateful to have the utmost privilege of sharing just a few things about one of our heroes today. He is usually the one standing here delivering a didactic and inspiring message. I used to ask him, "Grandpa, did you write your speech yet? Do you know what you're going to say?" And he would just laugh and say, "Oh, Beck, it's all right here." Well, I've got a lot in here today that I'll share with you in the half hour I've been given. Don't worry, I only have 5 minutes. Although I could talk half an hour about him. Grandpa and I grew close at an interesting time in our lives. Both of us technically alone and became somewhat reliant on one another. Every guy I'd bring to meet him, he'd greet with a firm handshake followed by, "You know I could kill you, right?" Which left us a lot of time to spend together, since no one really stuck around after that. I would never be able to share or even recount all of the life lessons I gleaned from Grandpa. But I'd like to tell you about at least one of my favorite and most important ones. If you'd spent any time with Ed Vezey, there's a good chance you probably argued with him about something. From gun brands to politics, you name it, he had an opinion. In fact, I have no doubt that if Paul Goodyear and my grandpa are together right now, they'd still be arguing about which USS Oklahoma survivor was the best looking. In his last few years on Earth, I saw and witnessed the hardened heart of a lieutenant commander become a little softer. The first year I came to Hawaii with him in 2013, I saw him walk through these markers, up and down this memorial. He walked shaking his head with a look of fury and hatred in his eyes. Throughout the following year, every time we would discuss our earthly mission of love and forgiveness, I would bring up Pearl. The very next year, I saw him make the memory walk at the Punch Bowl Cemetery. At the top, as we looked out over Honolulu and over the ocean, he reflected later about that moment and said, "I am slowly learning to shed tears over pure beauty instead of fury and hate." I thought, surely if this man can forgive the tragic events of December 7th, surely I can love a little more. Surely I can fight it in myself to look for the good in others, even if the grace extended is unmerited. Ed Vezey helped teach me that. Either because he extended so much grace toward me, or he required a little more than I was used to giving. So one of those two. Just last year on Veterans Day, I picked up Grandpa and drove him to my nephew's school so that he could teach the kids what it means to be a veteran. I said, "Well, Grandpa, you're going to be talking to young kids today. Do you know what you're going to talk about? Do you know what you're going to say?" He shrugged his shoulders and laughed and said, "It's all in here." I said, "But Grandpa, these are kids, though. if you do have a filter up there, you might want to turn it on for this one. Needless to say, I don't know if anyone in that class will be anxious to join the military after he told them, "You just don't look as pretty after you're all shut up in war." Yeah, I don't think he did have a filter, really. You always knew what you were going to get with him, though. Brutal honesty. In fact, one of the last text messages he sent me was about a dinner that I had brought him, and I said, "How did you like it?" He texted back and said, "I would stick to being a nurse if I were you." There were very few things he loved in this life or talked about more than what these 429 markers represent. Attending the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor was his lifelong dream. Well, we made it happen, and he will be laid to rest tomorrow at the Punch Bowl Cemetery. Grandpa would always say, "I'm no hero, I just won't die." And, well, he's always been a hero, but now he can't argue us. About a year ago now, Grandpa's health took a turn for the worse. He was in and out of hospitals and rehab facilities. He had good days and bad days, days that he would remember what was going on and where he was, and days that he didn't. On the good days, I'd ask him as many questions as I could. What are your biggest regrets in life? What were your favorite years? When I asked him if he was happy with how his life turned out, he turned to me. He smiled, and he said, "Beck, my life was one whale of an adventure. I grabbed a hold, I went for the gold, and I got it." Thank you very much.
Becca, that was beautiful. Thank you. Wreaths are a significant tradition in the history of memorialization. Wreaths are presented to honor the legacy of the men aboard the USS Oklahoma on that fateful morning. And so we'd like to acknowledge and recognize these wreaths that you see today, donated by the USS Oklahoma Association, the National Park Service, and the sons and daughters of the Pearl Harbor survivors. Now, near the conclusion of our ceremony, I would like to ask you to please rise and remain standing for the benediction, followed by a military rifle salute and taps. The chaplain will now offer the benediction, and taps will be provided by Mr. Hugh Kinsey, who brought us his bugle several years ago and returns to us now from bugles across America.
Let us pray. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm has bound the restless wave, we think today of this sacred place made special by such sacrifice, special by your presence. For even as we sing the verse of this song and we reflect that men were in peril on these waters, that they cried out to you, we know, Lord, that you heard them. And even though they may have died in ways that we don't know, we know that your hand held them. Their names are written here behind us in these marble stones. May they forever be written on our hearts. Amen.
Will the color guard come forward to retire the colors? and salute. Ready, two. Color guard, retire the colors. Thank you. You may be seated. I would like to thank all who participated in today's ceremony. Staff, partners of the United States National Park Service, members of the United States Navy, United States Marine Corps, other services, and local and visiting dignitaries. As well, of course, as the Pacific Fleet Band who provided our music today, as well as the sailors from the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard who provided the historic photos to my left that I hope you've seen. And a special thanks to all survivors, those who have traveled near and far, our military families, our military members who previously served, as well as those on active duty currently serving our nation. We thank you. And at this time, I invite you to join us by taking flower heads in this basket and placing them at the base of the white marble standards in a floral tribute to the hundreds of shipmates who were killed in action on and within the USS Oklahoma in December 1941, as well as those interred at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific Punch Bowl. Please join us by taking one of these flower heads. Thank you.